Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, NBA reporter and analyst for Buha's Block, and welcome to another live show. This is the third time in the past 6 days that right before I went live, we had some breaking news. The latest is that, quote, due to sizable distance apart in negotiations, end quote, Jalen Duren is going to be meeting with the Sacramento Kings and trying to work on a sign-and trade per Chris Haynes. So we had that monster news drop right before the show, so had to start looking into that a little bit. That does signal that Duren could be potentially on the move to Sacramento, or is at least gettable in theory. Does also seem to signal that the Lakers are not going to be that team as of right now, but a lot can change over the next 24 hours. But we have a ton to get into. Marcus Smart opted out and appears likely to be leaving the Lakers, which I think would be a massive blow. I do not think this is the same thing as Dorian Finney-Smith, and I will break down why. DeAndre Ayton opted in. I will touch on that. No clarity yet officially on Nick Smith Jr. and Bronny. Now, technically with Bronny, we could get some sort of tweet clarifying Bronny's status, but the Lakers do not have to announce anything technically. I think the announcement would only be coming if he was being waived. So based on the available information right now and nothing having come out up to this point, I would assume that Bronny contract is fully guaranteed at this point. Nick Smith Jr., I'm a little bit surprised if the Lakers pick up his team option, especially with the drafting of Cameron Carr and just the current makeup of the roster. The Lakers have a ton of guards and wings right now and are really lacking in the front court. So I feel like that Nick Smith Jr., to me, it doesn't really make sense to have both of those guys on the roster. And with LA still in the mix for LeBron, I think it made sense to keep Bronny, but to me, you got to pick between one of those two guys. I don't think it makes sense to have both of them. Now, you could also just opt in and potentially put one of those guys in a trade, and maybe the Lakers end up moving one of them. So you always need some salary filler in trades, and that could be the way that this plays out. But I would rather just have the cap space instead of Nick Smith Jr. on the roster. Then we have the Duren situation, LeBron and AD potentially teaming up to go to Golden State, and then Ja being traded to the Blazers out of nowhere. And the, let's say, unique fit and proposition of him playing in Portland based on their current backcourt and just how much perimeter talent they have. As for the Lakers and the news of the day, so Marcus Smart opted out, and over the last couple of days, I would say, at least on my radar, starting Friday-ish, maybe Friday, Saturday, there started to be some buzz that Marcus Smart and the Houston Rockets are, technically cannot agree to anything, but that there's some momentum behind Houston's pursuit of Marcus Smart, and that they're going to make an offer to open free agency to him. And that eerily similar to last summer, the Lakers acquisition that transformed the team's defensive identity, that transformed their locker room culture to some degree. A leader, a defensive leader, will likely be heading to Houston. And there are some clear similarities between the Marcus Smart situation and the Dorian Finney-Smith situation, right? Both guys in their early 30s, both guys with checkered injury histories, though more so Marcus than DFS. Both guys who led the team in plus minus with DFS after he joined the Lakers with Marcus the entire season. And really, you saw a dramatic defensive difference when each player was on the floor and just the impact that they made. The key difference to me, or the key couple differences, one, Dorian Finney-Smith was coming off of offseason ankle surgery and was viewed to some degree as damaged goods. And that there was a concern about when he would be available to start the season, how it would potentially impact his next season. That is not the case here with Marcus Smart. So already like and that was back in June, going into free agency last year. So the Lakers were aware that DFS had this procedure and that there was some uncertainty about his status to start the season, which obviously he missed a good chunk of the season and then just wasn't the same player for Houston. So LA had this intel that DFS was not going to be the same guy. And it totally makes sense why they would not want to keep him. It's not the same thing with Marcus. Like, yes, Marcus does have a more extensive injury history than DFS. And this could be a potential, I would almost say sell high opportunity, except the Lakers aren't selling high. They're not getting anything for Marcus. So it's maybe getting out at the right time and not committing yourself to a 2 or 3 year deal that you might regret in year 2 and or year 3. But I just don't think these are the same thing. And I think anyone just looking at it, well, remember last year, the Lakers, fans were upset. Analysts were crapping on them for not keeping DFS, and look how that played out. Like, yes, that can play out this way. That's certainly within the realm of possibility. I just think Marcus and DFS are in 2 totally different physical states right now. And the second part of this, and I think the even more important part of this, is I just think Marcus is better than DFS. And if you look at his numbers in both the regular season and the playoffs, Marcus, I just think, was more impactful, had a more dramatic impact on LA's defense, a more dramatic impact in terms of on-off and net rating. And so I just think Marcus was is a better player than DFS was for the Lakers, and was a more impactful player than DFS was. So to me, I see like the low-hanging fruit here of guy in their early 30s, defensive guy, aging. Lakers probably just got their last like season of a certain caliber. And I understand that to a degree, but I think the 2 big differences here are Marcus is a better player than DFS, even like judging them, obviously not right now, but going back to time machine of where DFS was at this point last year to where Marcus is right now. I think Marcus is clearly better. And then you look at also the injury and health situation. Marcus is in a much better place than DFS was. So if we find out that Marcus had this secret procedure and he's in doubt to start the season, that's a totally different conversation. But I do not think that this is the exact same thing as DFS. And I think anyone framing it as such, to me, it's just, it's wrong. And so I think Marcus leaving would be a devastating blow for the Lakers. I think it'd be a huge hole to fill on the perimeter. I think the ideal offseason outcome for LA is slotting Marcus Smart in the Alex Caruso role in OKC, where he's this high-level bench defender who is only playing 18 to 22 minutes a night, but can close games if you need him to close. Can't even start, like, maybe the starting group didn't get off to a good start in the first half. You could go to Marcus in place of someone else in the starting group in the second half. And very similar to what Caruso does for OKC, I think Marcus could have that type of impact for LA. And I think that's a proper slotting of him. I think he does need to be in a role. Played 28 minutes a game this past regular season, 34 in the playoffs. I think both of those numbers need to be lower. I think the regular season numbers need to be closer to 20, 22 minutes. The playoff numbers, somewhere in the mid to high 20s. And that's a more appropriate role for Marcus that I think he could, as long as he stays healthy, which obviously is a big if, could extend his career and could be a situation where he thrives over the next couple of years. Now, I think a big thing here is going to be 2-year deal versus 3 years. And my understanding is for the Lakers, they're looking at this as they would prefer a 2-year deal, whereas Houston is likely going to be giving him a 3-year deal. We'll see if that's a 2+1 or just a straight up 3-year deal. I'm also very interested on the AAV. I've heard different things out there, and one version of that is a relatively low AAV that if the Lakers, if it's a low AAV and they just let him walk, like, you better have a replacement lined up. And just looking at the market right now, we're going to go through it with the Wings episode tonight. There's not a lot of guys out there that can do what Marcus Smart can do, especially for his projected price this offseason. And of course, there's guys that are, the Peyton Watsons, Tari Easons, Herb Jones, Derek Jones Jr., those types. But those guys are going to be expensive, either in salary and or draft capital. So, there's opportunity cost there to some degree. And ideally, you're adding that player and then just slotting Marcus into a bench role. So I've talked about in terms of roster construction, the Lakers, in my opinion, need to add 2 to 3 high-level defenders into their primary rotation. If that was with Marcus, though, you take Marcus out, that number to me becomes 3 to 4, and it's like now you still need the defensive center, you still need the starting two-way wing, and now I think you need a couple of high-level bench pieces defensively that can play in a playoff setting. And so I just think it's a mistake. Now, if it ends up being like a 3-year, $45 million deal, they're basically giving him the full non-taxpayer MLE for 3 years. So be it. I think that's an appropriate walkaway point for the Lakers. Like, that's just too much money and there's too much risk. Like, my ideal Marcus Smart contract is something like 2 years, 20 to 26 million, right? Like 10 to 13 million AAV over 2 years. I would do that in a heartbeat. Once you start getting, of course, if you could get him in the room exception, that would be great. I don't think that's going to happen. Clearly, his market's above that. But I think right now it seems to be both like AAV and years. And maybe the AAV is low, and maybe it is just a years thing, and Marcus wants the 3 years, and the Lakers just won't go there. But if you lose Marcus for nothing, most of the guys that I think will realistically be available just aren't as good defensively. Like, I'm doing this spreadsheet with all the Lakers wing targets and looking how they all stack up. Marcus is like a 90th percentile defender in so many categories and just so many overall defensive metrics that like he rates out as one of the best defenders on the list, just straight up. And even some of the targets we're talking about, Marcus has better defensive numbers. So it's like, I think he needs to be in a certain role, and I get the reluctance to go for 3 years, but to me, this would be a real blow. I also think he plays a more important position than DFS does, in the context of DFS had sort of transitioned into a different phase of his career athletically, similar to Marcus. But the difference with Marcus is more of a backcourt defender who could guard up a bit, and now has transitioned into being more of like a wing, whereas DFS went from being a wing and has transitioned into being more of a big. So DFS was often guarding 4s and 5s. The Lakers went small a ton with DFS. But when you saw him guard like Anthony Edwards or some of the more athletic wings, that wasn't quite in his wheelhouse. It wasn't quite within his repertoire at this stage of his career. With Marcus, he's still the guy you're putting on SGA, Amen Thompson, KD, like whoever's the primary scorer. If you need to get a stop, Reed Shepherd in that first round series as well, like whoever's the primary ball handler and or scorer, shot creator, Marcus was still getting that assignment and doing that at a very high level. So I just think he plays a more important position overall within the Lakers' defensive hierarchy. He is, to me, a clearly better player than DFS. And as of right now, with at least the current information, in a much better physical state than DFS was going into free agency. So look, the Lakers lose him, and they're going to have to find a way to replace it, replace him. But I with the current information, and unless they're pulling Walker Kessler and Peyton Watson out of nowhere and just clearing all this additional cap space and going for it that way, I think if it is something like getting one of those two guys and then you're patching together the center spot or you're patching together the wing spot, and you're not really getting someone as good as Marcus defensively, I just think that's going to be a blow to the defense, and they should be looking to keep Marcus in a bench role and add to the defensive talent, not lose more defensive talent and then have even more boxes to check. But we shall see. Look, this could be a leverage play to some degree, right? Like, this is lying season. This is smokescreen season. Maybe the Lakers, their option A, B, C fall through and they go to option D, and it's okay, we're going to pay Marcus more, like not the 3 years, maybe it's 2 years, but higher AAV, and they find a way to keep him. And that could be how this all plays out. But for now, there's a ton of smoke with him going to Houston. Done deals is aggressive, but it does feel like there's close to something in place there. And it's probably going to be a 3-year deal, which I don't think the Lakers are comfortable doing. So at that point, though, I just, if the AAV is below, like if the AAV is single digits, I would be really disappointed that the Lakers couldn't match that, or at least incentivize him with a 2-year deal that got close. Because if it's something like, I mean, I've heard some things floated like the $7 to $9 million range, and if he's making like 3 years, 21 to 27 million overall, if I'm the Lakers, I would throw 2 years, 24 or something like that. 2 years, 23, 2 years, 25. Like, I think he's too valuable to lose. And again, we don't know the full context of like the opportunity cost there. And maybe the Lakers get Walker Kessler, then trade for a wing. And that is just still a realistic scenario here where they would come out looking pretty good. But barring something like that, if it is just one or the other in terms of high level big, high level wing, you still need more. Like Walker Kessler is not saving the Lakers' entire defense. He's going to be a huge step in the right direction. They still need an elite defender in the starting group, and they still need a high level or two bench players. Like you need 4 of your top 7 or 8 guys to be really good defenders. That's just the modern NBA. You look at every modern champion. I mean, most of them have stacked rotations of 5 or 6 good defenders in their top 7 or 8. But the exceptions, which I think the Lakers would probably have to be if they are going to win a championship with this group next season, you're going to need at least 4. And right now, you could argue the Lakers have 0, especially if Marcus leaves. They were projected to have 1 if they kept Marcus. Now they're at 0. And so you're going to have to find a way to fill that and try not to fill that with heavily flawed players. Because like a guy like Matisse Thybulle might be close to Marcus Smart defensively. I think Marcus is better defensively, but they might be similar. Giant gap between those guys offensively, just overall with the impact. And also just Marcus's impact on the Lakers, like the communication, the role in the locker room. I just think there's so many things that he does that even like just a player with a similar skill set might not be able to do necessarily based on, I think, the impact he had and the connection he had within that locker room. But we'll see. We'll see how things play out over the next 24 hours or so. But right now, it is trending toward him going to Houston. Then second big thing of the day for LA was DeAndre Ayton opting in. And no surprise here. There had been a little bit of buzz going back to last couple of weeks that he might be opting out and would maybe have a market. I was always skeptical of that. I was always penciling DeAndre Ayton as opting in. And if you remember, every cap sheet I did basically over the last month has had DeAndre Ayton opting in. I did not think there was going to be a market for him. And I just have 2 quick thoughts on this. Like, one, DeAndre Ayton making $8 million is a solid value. I think DeAndre Ayton outperformed that contract this past season, and 12.5 points, 8 rebounds, a block, one of the most efficient finishers in the league, and was part of the starting center on a 53-win team, a team that made the second round. All those things are true. DeAndre Ayton contributed to all of that. Was he pretty consistent? Yes. Were a lot of his rough games against elite teams? Yes. Did the Lakers have the second worst rim field goal percentage allowed in the league? Yes. But DeAndre Ayton still was an overall net positive contributor, in my opinion. I think it was slightly closer to net neutral than anything, but for $8 million, you take that. And there are plenty of centers making more money than him that he performed better than. However, the second part of this is that clearly there was not a better alternative for DeAndre Ayton, because if you have Luka Doncic publicly or through a report, but someone close to Luka coming out, and that's obviously got to be vetted and approved by Luka's camp, coming out and saying that Luka wants an A-list center, Luka wants the long-term piece as a center. They clearly, like, DeAndre Ayton is clearly not it. I mean, you didn't need Luka to even say that to know that, but like that just confirms that Luka feels the same way. So even if DA stays a Laker, I think they're going to move him into a bench role. I would be pretty surprised if he's the starting center on opening night. So the fact that he opted in to be a bench center making $8 million, there was not a better offer out there. If there was a better offer for 2 years, 20 million, 2 years, 25, 2 years, 20, like whatever, some portion of the non-taxpayer MLE, I think he would have opted out, even if it was in a backup role just to get more money. But the fact that he opted in, I think is almost certainly going to be relegated to a backup role. That to me was like also an indication of his market. And like, this was supposed to be a year where he rehabbed his value, and it was such a no-brainer that he would be so much better than this $8 million that he would opt out and get a bag this summer. And maybe not a Portland bag or a Phoenix bag, but get a relative bag. And that just is not how this played out. So, I mean, look, if you look at the teams with cap space, Brooklyn does have a need at center after trading Nick Claxton. The Bulls don't. Although you could still argue maybe DA could be a backup there, placeholder backup, whatever. But there are several teams out there that have the non-taxpayer MLE or some portion of an exception that could have, room exception, non-taxpayer MLE, that could have offered DA similar or slightly more money to try and pry him from the Lakers. And that clearly was not out there for him. So on the one hand, like from a Lakers perspective, it is a value to have DA on that contract. And even in a backup role, you could argue he's still worth that money. It also gives them another trade chip where now they have an $8 million expiring contract that they could flip, and they could flip him immediately. They could flip him right now as we're speaking. But I also think it is a bit of an indictment on the contract overall, where it's still league wide did not like his. I don't think his performance last year, I don't think him taking the discount and trying to buy into what the Lakers were doing, even if he largely bought in, with the exception of that dip from like December to January and the Capella stuff, like he largely bought in, but I don't really think it changed his perception. I think there's still a relatively low market for him right now. And most people view him as a backup. I would say most people. I haven't talked to anyone who still views him as a starter, and then clearly just the money was not there as well. So that's my perspective on the Ayton situation. From the Lakers, you don't have to trade him. I would still prefer to trade him, especially if you are retaining Jackson Hayes. I would like, if the Lakers go with a 3-center committee, I would like some more, contrast and versatility with the backup center. So like preferably either a better defender or a stretch big. Like I think it's got to be either like an elite rim protector off the bench or a big who's mid to high 30s 3-point shooter. But Ayton and Jackson, I think there's enough overlap there where, again, in a smaller role, you can maybe justify it. But I think depending on who the Lakers get as their primary center, I would like a little bit more versatility there. Next up on the docket is Jalen Duren and the breaking news that we received right before I went live. And so Jalen Duren potentially going to the Kings. This would likely, per Sam Amick of The Athletic, require Sacramento to send Domantas Sabonis to Detroit. I do not like this trade. Oh, wow. We had Porzingis breaking. Okay. So I missed a couple things here. Kristaps Porzingis is going back to Golden State on a 2-year, $40 million extension. He will have a player option in the second year. And then Harrison Barnes has re-signed with the Spurs on a 1-year, $8 million deal. That Porzingis deal, it's high. That's over the non-taxpayer MLE, which, like, when he's available, he is worth that. The question is, how available is he going to be? And I don't have clarity as to if this impacts their pursuit of AD and LeBron, if at all. But if I'm Detroit, those who listen to the show know how I feel about Domantas Sabonis. I don't think you're winning a championship with Domantas Sabonis as your center. And for as flawed as Jalen Duren might be overall, and particularly on the defensive end, he's a much better defender and rim protector than Domantas Sabonis. So from a pure like points per game and rebounds per game, and even some of the top efficiency numbers, Sabonis rates out fairly well because he's an efficient big who's a good rebounder, but his defense is among the worst in the league, especially from a starting. I mean, I was just looking at this. He didn't play that many games this year, so it was a relatively small sample size. He allowed 70% shooting at the rim. That is like, I don't think you could comprehend how bad 70% shooting at the rim is. It was one of the worst marks among all centers this past season. And I just think it's a layup line when he's out there. And you could just look at Sacramento's defense the last couple of years to confirm that. So if you're Detroit and your hand is forced here, and it's like the only option, I guess, but I would prefer to go after a guy like a Daniel Gafford or see what you could potentially get in the free agency market with, creating a little bit of cap space. I don't know the exact cap scenario right now, depending on what happens with Duren, depending on what happens with Tobias Harris, but I'd almost go like I'd rather replace him with a defensive big. Now, he was such a big part of their offense that the counterpoint would be you can't lose that. But I just think if you're bringing in Sabonis, like Oscar Thompson's great defensively. I think Cade is above average to solid, depending on the matchup. But I don't think they're protecting him enough out there. So in terms of the Lakers factoring into all this, though, obviously this would indicate that the Lakers' attention would be shifted entirely toward Walker Kessler. Like maybe if the Pistons officially are like, hey, we're giving up Jalen Duren, let the highest bidder get him, the Lakers can enter that mix and do have the cap space to absorb it and have multiple picks that, 2 picks plus whatever other assets Detroit might want. If it gets to something like that, then of course it comes down to like, how do you feel about the fit with Duren? What's the cost of his contract? What's the cost of the trade? Is it both first round picks? Is there a bidding war here for him? I mean, he's a 22-year-old all-star center coming off of a 3rd-team All-NBA season, but he also really struggled in the playoffs on both sides of the ball, was outplayed by Wendell Carter Jr. and Jared Allen, and really struggled in terms of his processing and reading the game on both sides. So it's like, I don't think this is who he's going to always be, but I do think there are some built-in limitations. And I also have some defensive questions with him and just like, what can he be the defensive anchor on a title team? I don't know the answer there, but if you're the Lakers, I think with the way the market is shaping up, which we'll get to the Jusuf Nurkic stuff in a moment, I think I thought Kessler was already the number 1 target, and I've been saying that for months, but I think this just continues to solidify that. In terms of the Jazz and Kessler, Jusuf Nurkic did re-sign on a 2-year, $22 million deal, which I was shocked by. I think that's incredibly high for Jusuf Nurkic, especially within the context of Utah already having multiple bigs making a lot of money. So I don't know if this is the precursor to Kessler leaving. I don't know if this is the precursor to a different move where maybe they're flipping Markkanen or they're flipping someone else within their roster, but it was a bit, I think, high. I just don't see who else was going to pay Jusuf Nurkic $11 million a year. And I also wonder what this means for Walker Kessler, the Jazz. So the Jazz are technically about $38.5 million under the luxury tax. So they have plenty of room to still retain Walker Kessler. So just because they added Nurkic does not mean that the sky is falling in Utah, at least, and that Kessler's gone. But to me, this does signal at least an element of Kessler insurance. And they have Triple J, Lowry, Nurkic, and Filipowski. And so they do have a bit of a crowded 4-5 room. I think you could argue that Triple J is more of a full-time 4 than a full-time 5, despite he just doesn't rebound the ball well enough and doesn't play with enough physicality. Lowry can also scale down and play at the 3. I think he's probably more of a 4-3 than a 4-5. And then Filipowski is could play either big spot. Nurkic is exclusively a 5. So depending on how you want to look at it, they could have as few as like 2 5s or as much as maybe 3 5s, and that just depends on how you want to classify each player and how Utah feels about it. But I don't think this means Kessler is gone. I think they are reading the tea leaves and saying, hey, he might be gone, so let's retain Nurkic at a minimum. But I was more surprised at like the number, because I don't know, I felt like was Nurkic going to get more than 2 years, 14 million, 2 years, 16 million? Like it just, him getting double-digit millions. Like he's a solid player, but I think he's clearly a backup level player. He's incredibly limited defensively in terms of his foot speed in pick and roll coverages and overall rim protection. And, he'll put up the points, the rebounds, the assists. But I just think that's a backup big. And that's a lot to pay a backup big when you already have a bit of a loaded front court. But I'll say there's been a lot of Lakers and Kessler smoke over, I mean, in general, but especially the last 2 or 3 days. Does that manifest in the form of a monster offer sheet to open free agency? Does it manifest in LA and Utah agreeing to terms on a sign-in trade? That could be in play here, but that would require draft capital going out to Utah. There was the proposed offer sheet from Sam Quinn, where it would be a 2+1 max offer for Kessler, where the idea would be to give him the max and really pay him for 2 years at the max, then hope that he plays ball and opts out after the second year, and then you could extend him on a lower number. The key word there is hope, because depending on what number, like if Kessler gets injured again or just doesn't materialize or develop the way that the Lakers are anticipating and that the way that Utah's anticipating, obviously there's some risk there of maybe he does opt in with that player option in year 3 at a monster number, because he would be making, it'd be the same contract essentially as Austin Reeves, where it'd be like 41 year 1, nearly 45 year 2, nearly 48 year 3. So you'd have a $48 million player option in year 3 where he'd have to juggle like, where's my market at? And of course, it could be a grand slam hit, and he and the Lakers fit together like peanut butter and jelly, and they agree to something that summer, and it's not at the 48 million, but it's at 35 or it's at 38 or something like that, and it's a multi-year extension. But you are playing with some fire there of if you could just max him out, right? In general, right? And just say, hey, we really want Walker Kessler. This is what we're doing. We're going all in for it. That's a possibility here, but the 2+1 at the max is interesting because it's still short term, ideally, where you're getting a couple years there and then see where things are at going into year 3. But there is some real risk of, it is going all in and potentially limiting your other opportunities of, like, if they sign him to a $41 million deal right now, they're projecting to have about 48 million in cap space, depending on if they retain the rights to Jackson Hayes. If they rescind the rights to Jackson Hayes, that would get up to about 52, but that's with taking Nick Smith Jr. off of the cap sheet. So it might be closer to like 51 right now. You pay Kessler 41, you have $10 million left over plus the room exception. So you're not, I don't think, keeping Rui at that point. You're not keeping LeBron. You could keep Luke for either part of that 10 million or the room exception. I think the market is breaking nice for the Lakers with Luke, where to me, he's looking like a $7 million player, maybe an $8 million player tops. So that's a good development for LA. But it's a lot to commit. Like, you are going all in. This is a guy who I think, if we're being honest, and I'm in the 99th percentile on Kessler. Like I said, I would pay him $37 million and give up 2 firsts. Like I think that's a pretty steep price to get Walker Kessler. But even I am like, realistically, he's probably a 30 to 32 million AAV guy right now that you have to overpay to acquire. Overpaying at a full max over a 3-year contract. Like, I understand the psychology behind it. I understand forcing Utah in a position where, like right now, with Utah being 38.5 under the luxury tax, they could go over the tax to retain Kessler, but that's now you're paying the tax. You got to be careful with the first apron. They still have, another move or two to make. And that could be something where they really sweat and think about it. So I think this is trending toward the Lakers having at least a real shot to get him. But I want to be clear that I don't think Nurkic and that contract means that Kessler's gone necessarily. I like the Lakers are either going to make a big offer or try to execute a sign and trade, and that requires Utah to play ball, and again will require draft compensation, but doesn't mean, like, Utah could easily just match. And the tricky thing is the Lakers, like, that contract wouldn't be starting until the moratorium is lifted, and then they have 48 hours. So you're going like deep into free agency. So you almost have to make your other moves around that. And then the downside is, if they match, then you're in some trouble because there's no one left over, and you have all this money. You're potentially, I think, would be under the salary minimum at that point. So you'd have to spend money to go above that. And now you're probably signing some 1-year deals to make up for that. So Lakers have some tough decisions to make here. You could obviously go the Peyton Watson route, and I think that one is a bit more straightforward in terms of, like, Denver has to get off some money here. Otherwise, that they're in a bit of a jam going into free agency, but they technically could also just match whatever with Peyton Watson and then get off that money. Like, it does become more complicated the longer you wait, but that's still within the realm of possibility. And then in terms of the other news of the day, let me just make sure I haven't missed anything else here. All right, I think I'm all caught up. In terms of other news of the day, there's obviously been a ton of buzz with LeBron James and Anthony Davis. And that situation is interesting to me. So LeBron and AD have been linked to Golden State. Golden State's been pursuing LeBron for over 2 years at this point. Remember, they tried to get him at the 2024 trade deadline, if I'm not mistaken. And they've been pursuing him for a while. And so I'm not surprised by that. And then the fact that they would be a package deal to go there also makes some sense just based on their history and their friendship. And they're both clutch guys. So Draymond Green opted out and will either be taking a discount or potentially signing a longer term deal regardless. But I think the final number will depend on what happens with LeBron and AD. I saw what Brian Windhorst said, and I do tend to agree with that line of logic here in terms of, I think this is a win-win situation for LeBron and AD, where they both were in situations, or are in situations rather, where their teammates, other star teammates, in LeBron's case, Austin Reeves, and in AD's case, Trae Young, just got massive contracts from their incumbent teams. And so if you're LeBron, you're looking at Austin just got 4 years, $185 million. If you're AD, you're looking at Trae just got 4 years, $212 million. Where's my money? And I'm sure both of them are looking at it like AD's like, I'm better than Trae Young. LeBron's looking at it, I'm better than Austin. Where's my money? And so I think there's a bit of a leverage play here in terms of if the Lakers are sort of calling their bluff and saying, hey, we don't think there's much of a market for LeBron in terms of what we can pay. And if we want to pay him $20 million, no one else can pay him $20 million. And that's like the best offer that that we're willing to pay him. Go find more money than that. Like, you're not. If they drum up, hey, Golden State is interested, that can apply pressure on the Lakers to increase that offer. The flip side with AD, he wants this extension. And if there's not much of a market for AD, or he's viewed as a negative asset, then that lowers his leverage in those talks. But if it's like, hey, Golden State really wants to trade for him, they have the matching contract and a giant expiring for Jimmy Butler. If they put some picks on the table for AD, they could potentially acquire him. And if AD goes, then LeBron's going to go. And then if they're both there, obviously the Lakers miss out on LeBron. They don't necessarily have a clean way to replace his exact skill set and all that he brought last season. And so I think there is a leverage element here. But I said win-win because I also think it would be like, if LeBron goes to Golden State, I think that would for him be a win in terms of, I think they're going to feature him a certain amount in the offense. And he and Steph, we saw what they did in 2024. And again, Golden State has had this long-standing now for a couple of years interest in LeBron. They've also been interested in AD going back to when he was in New Orleans. So this has been like a near decade-long pursuit of Anthony Davis. And then he'd be getting that extension and that money. So I think for those two guys in particular, there's really no downside here, whether it's either LeBron gets the contract he wants from LA or goes to Golden State and gets, maybe in a situation that he feels is better suited to his skill set and feels a bit more valued and validated there. And for AD, he gets he either gets the money from Washington or he gets the money from Golden State. So I don't really see the downside here for either one of these guys with how this is playing out. But again, I said this on Lakers Collective. I said this on the last live I did. If you just look at the actions and you do not look at the words with the situation, some of the stuff that's been reported behind the scenes, but even if you do look at the stuff that's been reported behind the scenes, like LeBron and the Lakers not talking outside of the initial conversation. Then it was reported that the Lakers have tried to reach out to LeBron and he hasn't really been receptive and has wanted to take his time with all this. So I think you could look at that, but I would also just look at the Lakers paying Austin. The Lakers are seemingly gearing up to be a cap space team now and go big fish hunting, whether it's in restricted free agency or the trade market. They're not necessarily moving like a team that is going to retain LeBron. Now, the flip side to this could be maybe they have a secret agreement in place where they're like, hey, we're going to go try to do X, Y, Z. If we do, we're going to resign you at this number. If we can't, we'll resign you up a higher number. We'll go over the cap. And that could be a big moving part right now. And also the Bronny situation where the fact that as of right now, again, to my knowledge here, looking at my texts and looking at X, not seeing anything, like there's no public resolution to the Bronny situation, which again, they don't have to announce that they are guaranteeing his contract. That's just typically something that if they're not waived, then that means it's guaranteed. So the Bronny thing to me was a little bit of a sign of, if they waived him, I did think that likely meant they were moving on from LeBron. Them retaining him does not mean LeBron is returning, but I think it at least means they're not trying to sever that bridge as of right now. But it's gonna be interesting to see how this plays out, because I don't know how much I'd want to pay AD if I'm the Wizards or the Warriors. Like if I'm Golden State, I would rather have AD and LeBron than Jimmy Butler, who potentially is going to miss more than half the year, and you don't know what type of version, just what version of him you're getting. And he's an expiring contract. If you could lock up LeBron for a 2-year deal, you could lock up some sort of 2 or 3 year extension with AD. That could be appealing, but a ton of risk there too. Like I was trying to think about it. When healthy, that could be the 4th best team in the West, maybe 4th or 5th. When not healthy, that's probably a play-in team. So it just depends on how available is AD, how many games is he willing to play, or able to play, excuse me, and how does LeBron continue to age into year 40, age 42, year 24. But that team at full strength, like it's interesting. Like Draymond, LeBron, and AD together defensively, not a lot of shooting. I think that would be a real weakness, at least in the front court. Obviously, backcourt, you got Steph, but the defense would be high level, especially with AD and Draymond together. And then final thing before we get into the Q&A, Ja Morant was traded to the Portland Trailblazers. My quick thoughts on this were, I was stunned. I do not see the clear fit here. I think the price was low enough with getting out of, getting off the Jeremy Grant contract, which I think he's done a better job the last season and a half or so of playing up to closer to the contract, but not quite up to the contract. I mean, he's making in the 30s, which is just too high for him. And then Chris Murray going out as well. It's crazy how far Ja's trade value has fallen, especially when you look at like what LaMelo just went for. And there was a time not too long ago where Ja was universally considered a better player than, I mean, I guess it was kind of a while. I mean, it's been like 3 years probably, I would say, since that point, maybe 2 years if you're a Ja truther, but it's been a steady decline for him over the last 2 to 3 years. And for him to go for that package where it's perceived to be a negative value contract, and I like Chris Murray, but he's not, I mean, he's not a needle mover. Like that being the trade package. On the one hand for Portland, it's like you're taking a gamble on it, and okay, like that low stakes, relatively upside play. At the same time, you look at, they're getting Dame back. They have Drew. They have Scoot. They have Shaden. That's a lot of backcourt players. And so this I think is a precursor to something else. What that something else will be, I'm not quite sure. I think in a macro sense, Ja and Dame in a backcourt together, I could see the offensive fit, especially if Dame's playing more off the ball. But the defensive fit to me, like if people want to flame the Luka Austin backcourt, even though it's not really a defensive backcourt because Luka defends forwards and Austin defends guards. I mean, the Ja Dame backcourt to me makes Luka and Austin look like all defense guys, because especially with Dame coming off of his injury situation, like you just have two small net negative defenders in the backcourt together. I do not understand that. So I mean, like you have Tamani Kamara, you have Denny, you have Cliggin, so you do have some front court size, and maybe they retain Robert Williams. We'll see what happens there. Thibault, whatever. They have some front court, and Drew can play. They make maybe go with some 3-guard looks, but just feel like there's a crowded backcourt now, and you already had the situation where you're pushing Scoot and Shaden to the side a bit, bringing in Drew, bringing in Dame, who was a longer term play, and then now you're trading for Ja. It's like maybe those guys get flipped for Jaylen Brown, and we're singing a different tune here, and it ends up being something like Clingan, Denny, Brown, Lillard, and Ja. That would be interesting. Still don't like the backcourt overall together, but especially defensively together. But yeah, the interesting swing from the Blazers that I did not see coming. We did get an update earlier. I had not seen this yet from Tony Jones of The Athletic, that Walker Kessler and his representatives are holding meetings with multiple teams to begin free agency. They will meet in LA at CAA's headquarters. So that'll be interesting. Let's see how that goes. But yeah, quick thoughts on Ja. Like for Memphis, I think it was time to move on. They needed to rebuild. They're in a new era, and it's wild that this was the best package. In theory, this was the best package. We don't know all the offers that were made, but that this was something that they felt acceptable for him. Like quite the fall from grace here. And then from the Portland side, I don't really get it, to be honest. I think like already fitting in with how ball dominant Denny was, fitting in Dame, I felt like was already going to be an adjustment. Now you're fitting in Ja into that. Like it does feel like there's some diminishing returns there, and you are potentially icing out your best player who just had an All-NBA, All-Star level season. And it's like one thing to do it for Dame, who's a franchise legend, the best trailblazer ever. It's another thing to do it for Ja, and a guy who I think is still looking to get paid coming up here with potential extension or re-signing. So will be interesting to see how Portland navigates all this, because I think the upside is higher, but I also think there's some clear downside as well. But with all that said, let's get into the Q&A. Eric Mata, thank you for the super chat. Jovan, what makes the second apron so restricting? Could you give us a quick breakdown? Why are teams so opposed to it? Yes, I will pull up all the restrictions here just because there are so many. I want to make sure I'm not forgetting anything. But essentially, most teams view it as a hard cap, right? Like a soft hard cap, which kind of sounds counterintuitive, but that's how most teams treat it, where you just don't want to go above the second apron. So if you go above the second apron, you cannot use your mid-level exception. So you lose if you are a tax-paying team under the second apron. You could use the taxpayer exception, which is about $6 million. If you are under the first apron, you can use the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which is about $15 million. And then if you use the non-taxpayer, the full version, you get no matter what portion of it you use, if you're using that specific exception, you get hard capped at the first apron, so you can't go above that. And then if you use that taxpayer, you get hard capped at the second apron. So you cannot use either one, non-taxpayer or taxpayer mid-level exception. You're ineligible. You cannot aggregate contracts in trade. So that means you cannot, if you're acquiring, let's say you're sending out $13 million in salary and you're acquiring a player that's $18 million in salary, you couldn't add in a second player to get to 18 or 19 or whatever range you need to get into for the math to work. So it restricts your ability to make trades, and you can do like for like trades where you're sending out the exact amount of money. So let's say you previously signed someone the prior offseason before you went into the second apron for the full non-taxpayer MLE for that year. You could send out that player for someone with exact matching salary. So maybe someone else signed someone for the full taxpayer MLE, non-taxpayer that summer as well. You could send out matching salary, but you're heavily restricted in terms of the types of moves you can make with trades. So again, you cannot take back a cent more than you are sending out. You cannot send cash in trades, so that sometimes people will throw cash in, especially if you are the Bulls, you like receiving cash. They will send the cash in trades. You cannot do that. Your trade exceptions get frozen, so you cannot use your trade exceptions as well. You cannot do a sign-in trade. If you do a sign-in trade, you are banned, or you are locked in at the first apron line, so you can't go above the first apron. So you cannot do that if you are in the second apron. And then if you are long-term in the second apron, there are penalties where you start to lose future draft picks. You start to have them frozen. I think it's if you're in the second apron, it's 3 out of 5 years, you automatically lose your upcoming first-round pick, or it is frozen and relocated to the end of the first round, excuse me. So yeah, like there starts to be some real penalties where it basically de-incentivizes teams from spending into the second apron. And because you could have some owners who are like, all right, well, like a Steve Ballmer or someone just being like, all right, screw it. Let's, Joe Lacob, whatever. Maybe Mark Walter, we'll see, like not now, but maybe in the future. Screw it. Let's go to the second apron. Like all these restrictions be damned. We don't care about the salary matching, or, we like our roster. We don't care about the trade exceptions, whatever, like let's blow into the second apron. If you do that too much, you're picking at the end of the first round for the foreseeable future over like, if you do it over a certain amount of time. So it's just really punitive to the degree that the downside outweighs the upside. And there's really I think barring you being a bona fide championship contender, like OKC is trying to duck the second apron, but I think if they do just stay in the second apron, like they are an exception. They won the championship 2 years ago. They made the conference finals this past year with the 1 seed in the regular season. They're a group that, okay, you could talk me into. They're a perennial contender. That makes some sense. But anything like below that level, it's really difficult to justify paying the second apron. So that's a brief, 2-3 minute breakdown on that. Revive Gamer HD, thank you for the super chat. So Duren leaving, but we're not trying to get him. I wouldn't necessarily jump to that conclusion. I think the Lakers have looked into it, but I think their preference is Kessler or Watson, and it's for a variety of reasons. I think up until, I would say today, honestly, Duren has been perceived to be the RFA of at least those three that was the least likely to be available just because of his age. I mean, he's several years younger than both Watson and Kessler. So he's the youngest. He's also the most accomplished as an all-star and all-NBA guy. So Detroit was just a 1 seed and made the second round. So it was perceived to be like, no matter how far apart they are negotiations, no matter how much Duren stunk in the playoffs, Detroit's keeping him. They're not letting him, like they can't just lose that asset for nothing. Well, they're not going to lose it for nothing, but they might end up having to trade him. Now, this to me, like some of the stuff with Duren, my read on it has been it's similar to how some of the stuff played out with Austin, except I think the Austin situation was a bit more straightforward, where there was the initial offer. It was not met well by Austin and his representatives. They did not like the initial offer. And then they went out and found a bunch of interest from the market that raised the price. And instead of just matching the price, the Lakers went even above and beyond. And we're like, we're giving you the 4-year max, which is even more money than anyone else could pay you in a 4-year context. So that, I think, was a situation where you had the initial disagreement in terms of value at the beginning. The market dictated he was worth X amount more, and he ended up getting a full max. The Duren situation is a bit more complicated because he can get even more than Austin's max. I mean, his max, he could get the 5-year 270, which is a monster deal. And there's no one else that's even, coming close to offering that. So I think if he wanted that or something close to that, and they're offering maybe low to mid 30s, that's obviously a giant gap in terms of the value. But then you look at the market, and I don't see Chicago. Brooklyn's maybe a little bit too low. Like, I think anything under 40 is probably just getting matched from Detroit, unless it ends up being, the sign-in trade. But I'm curious to see what the number ends up being, because that would be revealing in terms of how far apart they actually were in negotiations. But I think the Lakers are in on it. It just seems like, I wonder if Sacramento is willing to go higher in terms of the money, and it gets a little complicated because it has to be a sign-in trade, and then they have to be certain outgoing salary, depending on. I think it has to be within $7.5 million, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, but if I'm Detroit again, if I'm picking between Sabonis and Duren, I think it's a no-brainer to go with Duren, and I just bite the bullet and I retain him, and then hope that he has another strong season. And you just hope it works, and then if it doesn't, then you look to flip him next summer. Young Z Gaiman, thank you for the super chat. Yo, better see that same report for Kessler to LA. I think this one's maybe a little bit more complicated, but yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's going to be as outright as the Duren situation, but it seems like, he's going to take meetings, and the Lakers will be one of those meetings. And that's what West Coast Made noted. Appreciate the super chat. So yeah, I think it's a good sign for the Lakers. Like the Lakers will be in those meetings, and it'll be on them to have a compelling pitch to Walker Kessler, both financially, but obviously in terms of his role as well. Matt Green, think of a super chat. If we offer Walker Kessler or Peyton Watson the offer sheet, one is the 48-hour clock start. I keep seeing July 6th for some reason. So yes, the 48-hour clock would start on July 6th because that's when the moratorium ends. So there's a 1-week moratorium with free agency in terms of you cannot officially agree. Like you can announce. That's why, like with Austin, for example, I mean, free agency technically hasn't even started yet, but there's this like, it's a little complicated. They make everything too complicated. But so before free agency, you can now negotiate with your own free agents, and that's supposed to give incumbent teams an advantage. So that's why you're seeing like Phoenix re-signed everybody before the Miles Bridges trade, and the Lakers have already agreed to a new contract with Austin. Like that's, and it's also revealing though that they have not agreed to anything with LeBron. They have not agreed to anything with Rui. He has tomorrow. He's still extension eligible. It could technically come in either the form of an extension or him opting out and re-signing, but technically basically the same thing. And then they've not agreed to anything with Luke either. So that to me is, I would say up until the last few days was operating on the assumption that the Lakers are probably going to be an above the cap team and look to just use the non-taxpayer MLE and then make some trades with some combination of Vando, Jake, DK, and picks, maybe DA too if he opts in. Now it has been looking like they're going to be a cap space team and be going after one of these two guys. And now whether that's in the form of an offer sheet, honestly, for the Lakers, the better thing would be a sign and trade, even though you're overpaying even more potentially in a sign and trade, or not even potentially, like you are, because you're going to have to give up, I think, at least a first for each one of these guys. But the difference is, you are getting it. So it's like when you're in a negotiation for something, there comes a point where it's like, if you really are desperate for it, which I think the Lakers are desperate to land one of these two guys or someone of that caliber, it's like, if you could give us the first round pick right now, this will lock it in. And it's not the best form of negotiation, but I think for the Lakers, they have put themselves in this position where they need a headliner addition. I don't think they could walk out of this offseason with Mitchell Robinson, Robert Williams, and Kelly Oubre. I think that would be incredibly disappointing for fans, incredibly disappointing for Luka and for Austin and for Jay, like for everybody. It would just be a huge disappointment and on top of that, you probably lost people as well. You probably lost LeBron, you lost Rui, et cetera. So if they just like run it back with a worse or similar version of the team, or you shuffle some of the pieces, but it's not really a step toward OKC and San Antonio, that would be an incredible disappointment. So they need the headliner. They need one of these two guys or someone of that ilk. And I think it's going to be an expensive price, but I think for the Lakers, doing a sign and trade might actually be, or probably is the better thing, just because you are locking it in early rather than potentially signing the player and then losing them and then being caught in a compromised position. So to your point here, free agency starts June 30th, but July 6th is when you can officially start signing contracts. So they can agree to an offer sheet, like, in principle, but they cannot officially sign it until July 6th. Then they have the 48 hours till July 8th to decide on it. And so the Lakers, again, right now projecting somewhere between 48 to 52 million in cap space. If you sign Walker Kessler to a max contract, or you sign Peyton Watson to 30, 32, whatever that number ends up being, that's more than half. I mean, Watson's case, more than half your cap space. In Kessler's case, like 80% of your cap space is gone, maybe more. But it's theoretical. It's not guaranteed. Utah can still match it. So Utah can just sit back, let the Lakers kind of panic and sweat it out for a week, then even wait till the 8th. And then on the 8th, be like, hey, Lakers, actually, we're matching this. And the Lakers then, on July 8th, Walker Kessler would go back to Utah, and the Lakers would lose that $41 million from their cap sheet, which would then mean they'd have that $41 million to spend, depending on what other moves they've made. But there's not going to be $41 million just waiting for them there. Unless LeBron is not willing to side with anyone else and wait it out and be like, well, if you don't get Kessler, give me this much money, which I don't foresee happening. like that's a way it could play out. But otherwise, you're not like most of the guys that will be available on July 8th are like disgruntled RFAs. You'll go back to the last summer to when that happened, or minimum guys like that. That's how it is. So the Lakers would be in a situation where you're probably rolling your cap space over to next summer if you go the RFA route and you don't land the player, and that's a huge risk. So that's something that they're weighing right now. And I think as crazy and counterintuitive as it sounds, it might be better for them to just end up overpaying even more and just getting the player rather than play. Like this is the unfortunate nature of RFA, right? Like if you could think, oh, well, we're forcing Utah's hand, we're forcing Denver's hand here, but they can easily match. And like typically with how these things go, there's a reason so few offer sheets are even made in general. But on top of that, it's always in the incumbent team's best interest, unless they just think the player is nowhere near as good as the contract that's being signed and it's just a sunk cost at that point. It's always in their best interest to just match it. So it is a bit of a rigged game in the incumbent team's favor. And for the Lakers, if you sign either one of these guys to a massive offer sheet, there's the upside that you get them. There's also the incredible downside that you swing and miss, and now you're stuck in a compromised position with no one to replace them. So that's the game they're playing potentially right now. Notorious CRG, thank you for the super chat. Woohoo! JSM, my two favorite basketball channels. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yes, very excited to talk with him. So as a reminder, we're talking at 7 p.m. Pacific time, going over the top wings, ranking them in tiers, and then talking through how much we would either pay for them or trade for them. Jay Spares, thank you for the super chat. Guys, we got Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, so don't stress. You know what? That's good perspective here. The Lakers found their center of the future. They're in good hands. We'll see how the Exhibit 10 contract pans out. Matt Green, thank you for becoming a YouTube member. Shout out to Matt Green. Appreciate you. Purple and gold pinstripes. Thank you for the super chat. Jovan, why should we keep Braun if, according to reports, he won't even meet with the team? Isn't he actively sabotaging our offseason if this is true? So it's a fair question. And I don't want to jump to conclusions here in terms of what, there's a lot of smoke out there. So I would like a clearer and fuller picture of the entire situation before we go to like actively sabotaging. I think I understand where you're coming from, but I would not go that far as of right now. What I would say, and I've looked at it more from the team perspective rather than the LeBron perspective. But like, again, the Lakers have not necessarily been moving like a team that is. The thing I've been saying is I feel like the Lakers are operating like they want LeBron, like they would like LeBron, but not that they need LeBron. And I think there was a key difference in how they operated with Austin Reeves. At first, yes, they lowballed Austin. They tried to negotiate his contract down, but it became pretty apparent that it was like, no, we need Austin Reeves. And we're willing to pay up $16 million more in terms of starting salary, or $11 million more, but $16 million more in terms of AAV to keep Austin Reeves. And so that's not going on with LeBron here, right? Like I think while the Lakers move in silence and they keep their cards close to the vest and you don't always know what they're doing, I think we would know at this point if it was like, no, we're keeping LeBron no matter what. That I just don't think that's true. I think they would like to keep LeBron and they'd like to keep LeBron at a certain number, but I don't think it's as black and white as like, no matter the number, I think there's a walkaway point on both sides. And from the LeBron side, like if you're used to being treated a certain way, if you're used to being courted a certain way, if you're used to being valued a certain way, and you're not feeling that, then you're going to start to look elsewhere. I think it's as simple as that. Like the Lakers have other priorities right now, which are trying to find longer term starters to fit next to Luka and Austin. And then if LeBron fits into that, they would like to fit LeBron into that. LeBron is like, I was just playing at an all-star level during the regular season. I wasn't eligible because I missed too many games to start the year, but I led the group in the first round. I was the best player on a team that was the 13th biggest underdog to win a series in NBA history. And you guys are treating me like this. You guys aren't valuing me close to where I'm worth. Like, I think LeBron's worth right now, just in terms of teams don't have a lot of cap space. Like, I think his actual production and worth is higher than what the Lakers probably want to pay him, but also just like what the market is dictating right now, where it's just a bunch of non-taxpayer MLEs or minimums or taxpayer exceptions. Like, he's worth more than that, right? Depending on how you factor in the age and the concern with just injuries, load management, whatever. But so I wouldn't say actively sabotaging our offseason, because I think the Lakers are trying to do other things and then circle back with LeBron. So if anything, it's sort of like the Lakers have other priorities to start the offseason. And I think for them, whether they deem it's a successful offseason will first and foremost be determined by those other things. If they get the Kessler, if they get the Watson, if they get the young starter or two, then come back to LeBron. And if it works out, I think they'd be ecstatic. If it doesn't, I think they're ready for the next phase, but we'll see. I mean, my LeBron staying percentage has continued to decrease. So, we'll get questions about it. I think like last week I said 57% staying, 43% leaving. A few days ago, I think I said 53% staying, 47% leaving. I think I'm at like 50.5% staying, 49.5% leaving. The gap keeps shrinking. I mean, if we just take things at face value, it does seem like he's probably going elsewhere and the Lakers are probably moving on. But I still think, based on the Lakers' limited resources outside of just the straight up cap space to actually acquire like meaningful talent, I could see them adding one piece, shedding some salary, and then still potentially fitting LeBron into that. But it just depends on what happens with AD and this whole Golden State situation, or does he have interest in Miami, or San Antonio just re-signed Harrison Barnes and Julian Champagnie. So I don't know how much. I mean, he would obviously play over those guys, but I just wonder how they view their front court situation. They drafted a couple centers. Like, it feels like their front court is pretty full right now, that it'd probably make room for LeBron, but you never know. And then, is there any other dark horse contender out there? But I guess at the heart of this question, I don't think the Lakers are actively waiting on him necessarily. I guess that's my perspective on it. I think both sides are testing the market right now to see what else is out there. And then if the Lakers can't get some of their top targets, it's all right, LeBron, what's that number? And if LeBron can't get the interest or the right number from someone else, it's all right, maybe I stay in LA. And I think that's how this is trending right now. Muse okay. 420, thank you for the super chat. Jovan, what the heck is Plinka doing, man? Oh, sorry, he ain't. Duren wants out per Hayes and wants to go to Kings, not LA. Seriously, what the heck is going on? This is sad, honestly. And then follows up, TBH, I don't care if we lose Smart, Braun, Rui, but who we getting? Well, I would say depending on who the Lakers get, you might care about losing those three guys. Like I know people are ready to move on from some or all of these guys, but they were all big parts of LA's 53-win season and winning in the first round. So you got to be careful what you wish for, in my opinion. Just see what the replacements are before you go closing the door on them. But I mean, I'll say this, like Duren, especially if the price is in the low to mid 40s, I think it's not the cleanest fit to me, especially in comparison with Kessler. So, I mean, that's why Kessler for me was number one on my center big board for the Lakers in terms of targets. Like, I actually think the Lakers need a lower usage center. I think that was part of the tension with DeAndre Ayton. Was DeAndre Ayton wanted a certain amount of usage, wanted a certain offensive role. That was never going to happen on a team that had as much offensive firepower and shot creation and playmaking and ball handling as the Lakers. So Duren's better than Ayton, clearly, and that's why he's going to be making however, 6 times as much money, 5 times as much money as him. but there's still a little bit of a tension there of I think Duren wants a certain amount of offense run through him that I don't know if the Lakers can necessarily acquiesce that, depending on how things play out. But the other thing is I just think the defensive fit, to me, Duren is below the level you want to protect Luka and Austin and potentially just the limited defensive roster the Lakers are going to have. Like, I think even if they add Duren and a good defensive wing, that's still probably not enough overall with the current group to yield like a top 10 defense. And that, to me, is the limitation with Duren compared to Kessler, where he's already similar level rebounder, so you're not getting a rebounding drop off, but he's a much better rim protector and shot blocker. And he's also a low usage big who's pretty much just going to screen, roll, dive, cut, get putbacks. Like that's his function. He's not asking for the ball. He's not asking for post-ups. He's not asking for short roll ISOs and taking little jumpers. Like, that's just not his game. So I actually think the Lakers, I think they need in general more length and athleticism and defense, which Kessler checks that box and Duren does, but also lower usage guys who can thrive off the ball. And I think that's where some of the tension was this season with a guy like Ayton, who's used to certain on-ball reps. And that would be one of my concerns also with Duren. Easy peasy 97. Thank you for the super chat. Calling it Kessler, Rui, Oubre, and Mins. Okay, so I think to me, Kessler's going to end up somewhere, mid to high 30s at a minimum if it doesn't just go straight up 2-year max to pry him. So let's just say, for arguments, let's split the difference and say like 37. Then that gives you somewhere between 11 to 15 million for Rui and Oubre. So maybe one of those guys takes the room exception and one of those guys fits into that 15 or so. That's possible. And then the rest Mins, like, I would take it. So I guess your starting group would be Kessler, Rui, Oubre, Austin, Luka. That's the offensive look. Defensively, you have, I think, Austin and Oubre are the backcourt defenders. Rui and Luka are the forward defenders. Kessler's the 5. Oubre has the versatility to guard. He actually guarded a lot of 3s and 4s this past season. I've been looking into a lot of the wing guys, like positional data in terms of the position that they defended. And I believe his most frequent position was the 3. His second most frequent position was the 4. His third most frequent position was the 2. So Oubre has that 2 through 4 versatility, and that would fit. I think overall, I would be concerned. I think the Luka, Austin, Rui trio together is pretty limited defensively. And so there's a ton here on Kessler and Oubre to put out those fires and make up for some of those limitations. Like I think that could be an average to maybe slightly above average defense, but that's not a top 10 defense that I feel good throwing out against OKC, San Antonio, New York, like the top teams in the league. I think that group would struggle with those particular matchups. So that would be something. But you do, like, offensively, you got Kessler upgrade over Ayton, in my opinion, even in that specific role, and as an offensive rebounder. Then you have Rui as the stretch 4. You have Oubre, who can space, is coming off one of his best shooting seasons, and also transition guy, cutting guy, relocating, constant movement, in addition to the defense, the scrappiness on the glass. Like, I think that's a realistic lineup or lineup and outcome that I do like. I would like either the Rui spot or the Oubre spot to be a little better defensively. That would be my preference, but the Lakers do only have so many means to improve the roster, and that could be a way that this plays out. BT Kingsley, thank you for the super chat. Luka, Austin, Grimes, Collins, Robert Williams III, D.A. DeMar, Luke Kennard, Jackson, Keon, Jake. So I don't want to spoil the Wings episode. We will be touching on Grimes. I'm a little lower on consensus or on Grimes than consensus. I think he's I would classify him as an above average defender, but I would not classify him as a good defender. And he, like, some of his defensive metrics are interesting because some of them he rates out really well. Some of them he rates out negatively. And I was looking into some of his B-ball index stuff, and I think he does have like a lower A, but does have, you know, A perimeter or A minus perimeter defense, whatever. So I think there's something there to him, but in looking at who he defends positionally, he is more, my thing with him is he primarily defends ones and twos, and then there's a gap to forwards, and at 6 foot, he's listed at 6'4" and doesn't have long arms. I just think there's a bit of a size limitation there where my ideal wing defender is a guy who defends 1 through 3, if not 1 through 4 comfortably. And to me, Grimes, I think, again, is above average to solid defensive guard. I think he's a bit too undersized to guard true, like, apex wing threes and definitely fours. And so I'm open to him depending on the price, but to me, there are several guys like, you know, Watson's got the 1 through 4 defensive versatility. Eason's got the 1 through 4 defensive versatility. Herb Jones is 1 through 3. PJ Washington is 3 to 5, doesn't really guard down. Derek Jones Jr., 1 through 3. So I just think Grimes is a little bit limited overall as a defender, but also with his positional versatility. So that, to me, like, you could technically here be putting him just on the primary backcourt guy and be putting Austin off to the side. But now if you're guarding or, you know, playing the big, you know, if you're playing Boston with Tatum and Brown, now you're putting John Collins on one of those guys, which I don't love. You know, Collins to me is more of a 4.5. So I think this is a realistic build to, like, now the DeRozan part. I guess, is he a buyout guy in this scenario? I don't foresee the Lakers trading for him. And I think if they trade for him, he'd be a starter. And that is, to me, a non-starter in terms of, you're not starting DeMar with Luka and Austin. Then the bench, to me, doesn't have enough defense. If you're looking at it, like, it's on Keon and Jake. And I just don't think that's good enough for when certain teams have Kayshawn Wallace and Alex Caruso coming off their bench. I don't want to be thrown out. Like, this is where Marcus would be the ideal guy, in my opinion, to be that, like, defensive 6-man. But yeah, I'm not the biggest DeRozan guy, despite being an SC guy. And then I think if you go DeRozan, I think you got to move off of one of DA or Luke in terms of, like, you just need some more defensive balance in there. But it's interesting. I'm lower on Grimes, but I know several people are, you know, a lot of the fan base is high on him. BT Kingsley, thank you for the super chat. We need depth, especially if we lose Braun and Rui. And then follows up, how available is TM3 and Smart? He should retire in LA. Is this Trey Murphy? Is this Trey Murphy that you're saying here? I think Trey Murphy's available. I don't think the Lakers have enough to get him. I don't think 2 picks is enough. I think he's going for 3. Lakers Rise notes that Tony Jones tweet talked about that earlier. Sam LeGrand, thank you for the super chat. All the smoke around Braun leaving for Golden State, but what if Draymond opted out because he's coming to the Lakers? Just a thought. That is possible. I mean, I think things would have to really fall apart with the Golden State situation because I don't. For one, I think there's a slight limitation with Draymond specifically because he's not in LA. I'm a little lower on Draymond's fit because they've been floated potentially as like a trade deadline guy or maybe a guy the Lakers would acquire, like going back to last season. But he's not a rim runner, and he's also not really a pick and pop threat. He's more of a passing hub at the top of the arc. And I just think that directly, it's one thing when you have Steph Curry flying around screens and pin downs and different actions into being the best shooter and best movement shooter we've ever seen. It's another thing when it's Luka and Austin, who are way more ball in their hands, pick and roll practitioners, and need to leverage the threat of that screener, as a rim runner, as a lob threat, or at a minimum as a pick and pop guy. Draymond doesn't really check either of those boxes. That's where I see. So it's like you either need to put him, you could put Miles Turner there, right? And you could go with like a stretch big, but I think that's like really it works with Porzingis and Horford because they both can stretch, and we saw that work with Boston. But I think Draymond needs a stretch five because the lack of spacing, to me, it's like even if you have the rim runner, that's still going to congest the floor because it's going to be, all right, well, there's a rim runner. We don't have to guard him at the, near outside of the paint. We don't have to guard Draymond outside the paint. That's already compromising your spacing, like just with those two guys. So it could be something there. I'm not denying that. I think what would probably have to happen is the Braun and AD stuff doesn't fall through, and then the Lakers pivot toward Draymond. But I think the Lakers need a center or a wing. He's kind of in between those two needs. And I mean, or maybe just a small center if you want to label him that way. And so I'm a little lower on the Draymond fit, in addition to he's a clutch guy. And it feels like if the Lakers are moving on from LeBron potentially, I don't know that they're going to replace him with a clutch guy, but who knows? Fab XLA, thank you for the super chat. What's the upside if the Lakers extend and trade Rui to avoid losing him for nothing? Does that trigger cap restrictions? I'm worried they lost that value. That's the downside to not flipping him. This was something that we talked about at the trade deadline in terms of one of my trade deadline conclusions was if you don't end up trading Rui, that's probably an indication that you're retaining him, or at least you're putting yourself in a position where you kind of have to retain Rui unless you really just value the cap space that you're getting in lieu of him. They could sign and trade him, and the benefit for Rui would be the Lakers could sign him. Like most of Rui's suitors are only going to be at the non-taxpayer MLE range, and so they could pay him more than that, which starts at about 15. They could pay him 17, 18, and then use that to kind of do a favor for Rui, but also get an asset back of maybe they send back a player, or maybe they send back a second, 2 seconds, whatever. And it just, because I think Rui will have competition and there will be a market for him at that non-taxpayer MLE. And if Brooklyn's involved, which they've been linked to him, they could even just offer him cap space. Maybe they go above that. But if Rui is juggling 3 or 4, let's just say Rui's juggling like 3 or 4 non-taxpayer MLE offers, the trump card there could be, okay, well, we'll go above that if the Lakers sign and trade you to us, and we'll send the Lakers a second or two if they really like Rui. And then that's where, if Rui's trying to decide between 3 or 4 spots, it's like, oh, well, this team's going to pay me more and they're going to outbid everyone else. All right, I'll go there. So that could be like the final thing in terms of the negotiation. I'm really interested to see what his market ends up being, because we just saw like Julian Champagny. People were talking about him as like a $20+ million guy. He ends up signing for 15. That might just be a hometown discount situation with San Antonio, but I think most people would put him ahead of Rui in terms of like market value, and him getting that. Now, again, that's maybe a hometown discount thing, but that was an interesting development where I thought his market or his number with San Antonio would be a little bit higher. But yeah, I mean, in terms of triggering cap restrictions, no, it only triggers it if you are acquiring a player in sign and trade. You get hard capped at the first apron. So that would, but then if the Lakers acquire a player back from the team, that would then trigger them or limit them at the first apron. So, I mean, realistically, I think the Lakers are going to be around the first apron or probably trying to stay under it in general. So I don't think this makes a big difference either way, but it does make a difference from like an asset perspective. You do want to flip the asset for something ideally. And that is, what the Lakers are going to weigh if they don't end up re-signing Rui, but they still have till tomorrow. I don't remember. It might be 12 p.m. if I'm not mistaken. Okay. So there's a report from Sam Amick that Jalen Duren has a call with the Lakers tomorrow. So that's not as I'm trying to keep up to date here with the texts, and All right. Yeah, I'm trying to keep up with my texts and X. But so yeah, Jalen Duren, I guess, is talking to the Lakers tomorrow, which is a good sign, but it seems like he's meeting with Sacramento. So that's maybe a little more formal. But yeah, I think if the Lakers end up moving on from Rui, it would be better to do a sign and trade. XX Taz, I do not see a question, but I appreciate the super chat. Frankie Ocean, thank you for the super chat. If you lose LeBron, Rui, and Marcus, but somehow get Kessler in a trade, would you consider it a successful offseason? I like this question because I'm thinking about this and thinking about, I thought the Lakers would be retaining at least one of those three guys. I did not think they'd be losing all three. I thought there was a chance that I would have put the odds at like Rui as being the guy that was the most likely to leave just because of his cost plus the Lakers' need for spending that money elsewhere. So it's like, would you rather spend 17 on Rui or 9 or 10 on Marcus? Like, depending on the years, obviously, but I think the Lakers would rather spend that 9 or 10 on Marcus, or at least that's what I thought until we'll see. And we'll obviously see if they even want to spend that money on Rui either. But I thought they'd retain at least one of those three guys. I did not have them losing all three of them. So it's difficult to say without knowing the full picture here. However, I did note that from like a macro perspective, my goal for the Lakers this summer was there's almost no version of a roster build where you go into next season and you say they're on par with OKC or San Antonio. I think pretty much every conceivable roster build I've seen, I still like OKC's starters better. I still like San Antonio starters better. They also have a continuity element. They've been in the trenches together. San Antonio's been to a finals run. OKC's won a championship, been to conference finals, and several of those guys have been there for multiple years. So it's like they're just ahead of the Lakers right now in the race. So from that perspective, I was like, there's almost nothing the Lakers can do to get to that level. So like at best, they're trying to be the clear-cut third best team in the West, in my opinion, which still gives you a puncher's chance. But like that's right now what they're trying to do, at least on paper. So through that lens, one of the things that I view as a success would be adding a long-term starter. Like they have 2 long-term starters as of right now moving forward, Luka and Austin. That's it. And now that's the foundation of the team. That's a strong foundation, but this is now going to be the 4th transaction cycle that they've had with Luka Doncic on the roster, and they have not added one long-term piece. And so them getting a Kessler, them getting a Watson, them getting a Duren, them getting a long-term piece, I think has to be atop the to-do list, because I don't think you can just run it back and go into next season with Robert Williams, LeBron, and Marcus Smart. Like that's not a long-term foundation. Those are all three guys that might not be on the roster in 2 years. So they need guys that are in their mid to high 20s, maybe in Duren's case, even low 20s, and are going to be Lakers for at least the next 3 to 5 years. Like that needs to be, I ideally want 2 of those guys, but that's a tall task. That's, I think, difficult to pull off in one off season, at least based on their current options. So I'm looking at like, if you can get one of those guys, that to me constitutes like a long-term success. Obviously from a short-term perspective, I don't think the Lakers should just punt on the year, call it a gap year, call it a transition year. So I would like to see what the roster looks like in this context, but I would say in terms of like a long-term point of view, landing a long-term starter would to me honestly be the bare minimum to make it a success, but like would qualify a successful offseason. Now, you could say success is binary. I think it's a little bit more of a spectrum. And so to me, like this would be, again, the bare minimum of success. It would be a real success if they got 2 of these guys, or it would be a real success if they got 1 of these guys and then they got a couple of other young, interesting pieces that fit, that outperform their contracts and maybe turn into longer term pieces, even if they aren't inherently viewed that way at the time of the signing. Like that to me would be success. I would also look at the back end of the roster. Are the Lakers building out a real rotation here? Are they finding bench players who aren't just former lottery picks or buzzy names that had like nice high school mixtapes? Are they finding guys who complement the skill sets of Austin and Luka? Are they building a rotation where pretty much everyone is an athlete and long and tough and physical and can defend at a certain level, those are all the things I'm looking at in terms of a successful offseason. So yes, from a macro perspective, you get your Kessler, you get your Watson, you get the long-term piece who could maybe be a number 3 or 4 on a championship team. That to me, all right, like you did your big thing, but I'm also looking at the margins here. I'm also looking at are you getting off Vando? Are you getting off DA? Are you putting yourself in a position to be able to be a move away at the trade deadline to then feel better with how you stack up against OKC or San Antonio? If it's just, we got Kessler, but the rest of the roster is kind of meh, it's a success in like all right, you got your long-term piece, but I think the Lakers need to do more than that. So I don't want to cop out here, but I will say, like, I would view it as a success if they got Kessler, they got Watson, they got the stud RFA, or they got a stud in a trade. But I think it needs to go beyond that. I think the bar should be higher. And again, I don't expect them to build a roster as good as OKC or San Antonio, because I think it's impossible to do that this summer. I just don't think. I think they would have needed the Dalton to have hit and been Yves Missi or Tristan da Silva or something. They would have needed to have drafted Pods or Jaime Jaquez or someone else instead of JHS. And now they traded that for Luka, but still, it's like they needed more hits. I think with some of these, they needed the Jordan Goodwin on their bench right now. Like, they needed some of these hits that they just have not had. And that then I think would put them in position to be closer to that. But like, I said it yesterday, they have 8 dudes on the roster, and 2 of them I feel comfortable about playing in a playoff rotation. Like, I guess now with Ayton, that's 9, and you have 3 guys, but I only feel comfortable with Ayton in like a 10 to 15 minute a night backup role. I don't think he could play any more than that against OKC or San Antonio or the elite teams. So it's like, they're in a tough spot. They have like 2.5 rotation players right now, and you need to add like 1 to 2 high level players and then also fill out the rest of the group. That's a tall task, and we'll see if they can figure it out. Rip Van Winkle, thank you for the super chat. Open to AR for JD or Walker Kessler sign and trade given AR max not final. I don't think that is something that I don't think that is in play at all. So, I mean, I can entertain the hypothetical, but I would like adding one of those guys and keeping Austin, not flipping Austin for one of those guys. Because now I think you create an entirely different hole in the roster where you have a massive ball handling and playmaking and shot creation and scoring hole, and all the guys, like Io's gone. Like, that was the guy, people like maybe Kobe White, he's gone too. So now you're going to, you want Quentin Grimes to be the number 2 option on a playoff team? Like, I don't. So I think that would be a massive, I mean, it's just not going to happen. So, I mean, we could entertain the hypothetical, but it's not happening. That's agreed to. Shabugan, thank you for the super chat. At this point, what would be the percentage chance you think Pelinka actually pulls this together? This smells like a disaster, to be honest. It's tough to say, because I think my growing concern, and this was something I've talked about going back to the second half of the season, and I've talked about it a bunch on Lakers Collective, has been, I think the Lakers are going to get a name. And that's been my stance for a while. Is like, the Lakers are going to get a name, whether it's Kessler, whether it's Watson, whether it's Duren. Like, they're going to get one of these names, and it's going to be the headlining edition that looks great on paper and is great on paper, right? And it's a real edition, that long-term piece, top 3 or 4 guy on the championship roster the Lakers are trying to build. That is, again, to me, a successful offseason. But it goes beyond that, right? And that's where I don't have a lot of confidence in the Lakers, in terms of, they have not proven they can build a bench. They have not proven they could build the back end of the roster. They have not proven that they also know the bench pieces that best complement their starters. They have tended to over-index on one-way players and also on guys with pedigree. And I would contend that there are guys out there that just don't have the name recognition that would be better fits than some of the guys that the Lakers are interested in or have been attached to. And so, but also, like, you're not seeing a lot of defense out there in terms of the guys that the Lakers are being attached to, or not defense to the level that the Lakers need. So I think I would say my I would say I'm at like 60% of like them pulling off like the win of the offseason in terms of getting the name, getting like the headlining edition. But I'm more like, because again, if you get Kessler, even if he's at, let's just say 35, be a little conservative, you still have 13 to 17 million to fill out the roster. So aside from minimums, and that's before you meant, not factoring in LeBron, not factoring in Rui. That's not much to play with. And you might be paying that to Rui, or I think it's a little low for LeBron. I don't think that would be the number he comes back on. But I mean, what I'd like to see, what would give me more confidence would be if the Lakers dump Jared Vanderbilt and Dalton Knecht at some point here going into free agency. Barring them dumping those guys, they have, like, we know the cap space number, and doesn't mean they can't dump them once free agency starts, but like once Brooklyn and Chicago and some of these teams that have flexibility that you would want to dump those guys onto, because it's not like every team could just take on Jared Vanderbilt, Dalton Knecht. That's almost around $17 million in salary and 2 players. Teams aren't just taking that on, so you would ideally want to dump them on Brooklyn or Chicago, or depending on like I don't see the Clippers just taking those guys on. Like it depends on where teams' cap situations are, but you should be trying to dump those guys. And if you can't dump those guys, then you have a certain amount of cap space, and it's just there's a finite amount that you could spend. And if you spend 30 to 35 on a big free agent, you have like 15 to 20 left over, and that's just. I mean, you either then kind of split the difference with 2 guys, or you maybe overpay 1 guy, and then that's your team. And you lost LeBron, you lost Rui, you probably lost Marcus too. And like, if they went into next season with, if they went into next season with like Walker Kessler, John Collins, Jake LaRavia, Austin and Luka, or something like that, or Jake LaRavia and Kelly Oubre. It's like at that point, like Jake's ahead of Vando in the pecking order for JJ. Jake's ahead of Adu for JJ. Maybe those guys pass him, but like as of right now, that's how JJ views it. How would you feel about that? Like you probably wouldn't feel good. Maybe they get a minimum guy. Maybe they get like Matisse Thybulle or something like that. If it's Walker Kessler, John Collins, Matisse Thybulle, Luka, and Austin, like you got a nice defensive front court together there, but it's still like not up to the level that you would want to win a championship. So I have confidence in them getting a player that the fan base will like and will feel good about. The rest of the roster is where I have real concerns with how they fill that out. James, thank you for the super chat. Under what circumstance would Rob get fired? I don't know, to be completely honest. Like I think there's a ton of pressure this summer. So maybe a scenario in which they botch this summer, like aforementioned the RFA situation where they just don't land the RFA and have their cap space tied up, and then they're forced to sign a bunch of 1-year deals, and then they don't clean up the mess at the trade deadline, and then they end up maybe underperforming expectations or like losing in round 1 or something. So I think he will get at least through next season. I would be surprised if he is, if they move on from him before then, but I think there's a ton of pressure to nail this summer. There's a ton of pressure if you don't nail the summer to nail the deadline. And then there'll be a ton of pressure based on the team's performance. And I think those 3 tests will ultimately determine his standing next summer. And if he goes 1 for 3, or I think the results are obviously going to play a big part in this, in terms of even if the summer and the deadline are underwhelming, if the Lakers somehow like win and make the conference finals or something, then that would probably buy him some leeway. But barring something like that, if the summer and or deadline are perceived to be a little underwhelming, and it's just like this roster isn't that good, and they botch this whole cap space plan, and then the results don't follow, that could be a scenario in which I see it. But I mean, who knows? Like the Dodgers, obviously, based on how they have operated, there can be a ruthless analytical approach. So maybe I'm completely wrong and they end up deciding sooner than that. But my read on the situation is, I think based on them agreeing to the terms of the sale and in that process, Plinka getting extended, I think it'd be pretty surprising if he, unless like this summer was a complete disaster, maybe that is the one way that it happens like sooner. But barring like a complete disaster and at least a medium outcome, I think it would be next summer at the earliest. And again, like the summer would have to not age well and the Lakers would have to have a disappointing season. And then I think next summer they would take a look at things. Oi to boy, thank you for the super chat. Thoughts on Warriors trying to form the all NBA unks? I think it's fun, I guess. That's the first thing that comes to mind. Like, I don't think they're going to win the championship. I think, if they had like outlier health for AD, and look, Steph's been injured and Draymond's aging. LeBron's obviously going to be 42. So that they're battling father time and they're battling some injury stuff. If you told me they were fully healthy, I guess you can maybe put them in that puncher's chance. Like, could that group beat Houston in round one? I think so. Could that group beat the Lakers or Nuggets or Timberwolves? For the Lakers side, it's tough to say because we just don't know what the roster is going to look like. From Denver or Minnesota, I think we have a better sense, but we still don't have the full picture with their roster. So that one's tough. I don't think they could beat OKC or San Antonio. I'll just say that off the bat. So I think it'd be a fun story. It would make for unique coverage the entire season. I think some people would relocate up to the Bay to cover the experience, but they're, to me, probably like at best a second round team. And that's if everyone's healthy. Realistically, based on the combination of injury concern and age, they're probably more like a play-in team that loses to OKC or San Antonio, to me. Lars Golf, I want you to break my story. Lake Show Lars, DM me. Okay, I will DM you. Thank you for the super chat. Matthew the Sicilian, thank you for the super chat. John Portland reminds me of the Sheet in Stoudemire days. Feels like the most obvious place for him and his extracurricular activities. There was some Jailblazers texts going around by group chats and conversations. So yeah, I can, yeah. From that perspective, yes. Sheed, when he went to Portland, was at a different phase of his career. He was still on the ascent, where Ja, I think, has clearly plateaued, if we're being kind, and really declined, if we're being honest. But I think the general vibe, yes, I agree with it. The Jailblazers are back. Yu-Gi-Oh! Thank you for the super chat. I can't imagine the breaking point on LeBron going through the pain of another full year at 42 is money, LOL, but about winning a championship. I think that is fair. That's and look, Brian Windhorst reported today that he's heard it's happiness more than anything and more than money. I would just say that, again, this is my read on the situation. LeBron is a guy who's just always been valued at a certain level and has always been underpaid. And so I think money factors into the happiness to some degree. And just like think about working your job. If you feel like, if you're up for a promotion, if you're up for a raise, if you're up for a negotiation and you feel disrespected and you feel like, hey, I just did X, Y, Z and you're offering me X amount less, like you're going to feel a certain way. Now, imagine you've been doing this thing that you're doing for 30 years. And since you started, you've been a star and you've always been considered the guy. And you're now considered either the best or second best person to ever do your job. Even as you age and are getting close to retirement, you're still going to expect a certain amount of treatment. Like that's just how it goes. And so I get both sides of it. But I would agree that winning a championship, I think, is the overlooked part here. Now, how you feel about the Lakers versus that version of the Warriors potentially with AD is that version definitely has a lower floor than the Lakers. I would argue the Lakers with LeBron have a higher ceiling, but that's up for debate. And then Miami, that is in the East. There's less competition overall. You still got New York and Boston at the top, but I don't think you're too afraid of Detroit or Cleveland, especially if Detroit ends up flipping Duren for Sabonis. And then I guess San Antonio and maybe a couple other places. So it depends how he views all of that and what he really wants. And I'm not going to try to pretend to know what he wants, but I just think from a monetary perspective, it does feel like there's a little bit of a gap there, but we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong and they end up coming to terms. Now catching up on this. So yeah, I saw Sam's tweet. Thank you for the alert. Shabugan Sound Automotive Group. Thank you for the super chat. Given the rocky history between Aaron Mintz and the Lakers, do you think the Dodgers' relationship with CAA could ultimately help facilitate Walker Kessler to LA? That's a really good question. It has been rocky in the past. And for context, he repped D'Angelo Russell, or he continues to rep D'Angelo Russell, reps Julius Randle. And so with how some of those situations went a little bit earlier in the Lakers' tenure, and also reps Paul George, and Paul George famously did not want to go to LA or was not interested in LA pitching him. And I think the CAA relationship had a part to do with that. My understanding is I think the dynamic has improved, and I don't think it's like the best dynamic in the world, but I think it's better. And then to this point, the Dodgers' relationship with CAA, I'm sure, is a factor here as well in a positive sense. So I wouldn't be too look if they're going to pay Walker Kessler $41 million and Utah wants to pay him $32. I think they can look past some of the history. Cameron Parker, thank you for the super chat. Would you max Walker Kessler if you didn't have to sign and trade? Do you think Utah will match a max offer sheet? Where does the Luka AR Kessler trio rank in the NBA? I think my preference here would be sign and trade first, and then max offer sheet second. Then I would go like non-max sign and trade 1, max offer sheet 2, max offer sign and trade 3, and then non-max offer sheet 4. And the reason for that breakdown is, I think, as I mentioned earlier, just with the way that restricted free agency works, if you can just get Kessler and also get him below the max, if there's a way to get him below the max and just give up a pick or something to get him, I think you agree to the sign and trade, don't sweat out and try to call Utah's bluff and see where it goes like 2 days into the moratorium ending. I think you lock it in and move forward. The second option there would be the max offer sheet, because I think there is a chance Utah just doesn't match that. That might be too rich for them. And then you're not risking a sign and trade of like a max and giving up assets for it. Third would be the sign and trade at the max, because again, you're locking it in. I would rather just kind of take the gamble at that point and say like, I don't think they're going to match the max offer. But at that point, it's like, all right, now you're locking it in. Then last would be the non-max offer sheet, because that is probably low enough for them to max, and you're potentially setting yourself up to just waste your time and leave the dance empty-handed here in terms of free agency. So that would be my breakdown of that quickly. In terms of Luka AR Kessler, so really I think it's that order in terms of Luka AR Kessler, where they rank across the league. Off the top of my head, I mean, I would take OKC's trio ahead of them. I would take San Antonio's trio ahead of them. I would take New York ahead of them in terms of Brunson, Cat, OG. After that, though, I think it becomes a real conversation. Like, would you rather have Ant LaMelo McDaniels or Ant LaMelo Gobert? Or you could even argue Ant McDaniels Gobert, whatever way you want to frame that. Boston, Tatum, Brown, White, although White's coming off a bit of a down year and really struggled shooting the ball. I mean, I'm sure there's Jokic, Murray, Gordon, but can Gordon stay healthy? I mean, it could end up being Jokic, Murray, Watson. And obviously Denver has been linked to several moves that they could potentially make. I would take them over Houston, over Portland, over Phoenix, over the Clippers, over the current version of the Warriors, Pelicans, Mavericks, Grizzlies. So, I mean, in the West, I think the only two teams I would definitively take their trio over would OKC and San Antonio. And then I think a healthy Denver, I probably would take, I think a healthy Gordon, or if you want to put Watson third, I'd probably put that. Well, I would say a healthy Gordon, I would take over Kessler. Then Minnesota's close for me because I'm a little lower on LaMelo than most. East side, I would take, I guess I would still take Boston and I would take New York. But outside of that, I would take them over Cleveland. Mitchell, Mobley, Harden, I would still take them over that. And I would take them over Detroit. Because right now, we don't know if Detroit's going to even have Duren, but even if Cade, Duren, Thompson, I mean, that's a pretty good trio. But yeah, I would say they're probably fourth or fifth for me. But I'd have to probably think about it a little more. Amick tweet. I'm catching up here. Sorry, guys. I still got like almost 15 super chats, so I'll try to catch up on everything. Brad, excuse me. Thank you for the super chat. Saw a report they're meeting with Duren and Kessler tomorrow. Duren for sign and trade purposes. How likely do you feel at either point? Smell smoke. I think Kessler is more likely than Duren, and I felt that before the whole Sacramento situation. The Sacramento situation, the more I think about it, I just think it's kind of a leverage thing from Duren, but who knows? Maybe, I mean, if they're far apart, if we're talking like 10 to 15 million AAV apart, then I think he would walk at that point. Between the two, though, I think Kessler is more likely because I think he's going to be cheaper to acquire than Duren, just straight up salary-wise. And I also think he's a better fit. So, I don't, it's tough to say how likely, like I wouldn't say either one of them is likely. I would say they're both unlikely, but I think that the odds for Kessler are higher. Jerry Soriano, thank you for the super chat. We sold our second round pick. Can we surpass the second apron? No, the Lakers are hard capped at the second apron because of their second round activity. So it's a good note from you. Spencer, thank you for the super chat. What is the won't match offer on Duren and Kessler? It's a really good question that, hey, for Kessler, it might be the max. I don't even know if that's true, but I think I think anything above 35 probably gets Utah to start sweating, but I still wonder if they just match and then try to figure it out later. With Duren, I think it's probably going to be something in the 40s. And that gets Detroit to sweat a bit. So if I had to put like, I don't know for certain an exact like won't match offer, but I would guess for Kessler, it's something in like once you get to like the $37, $38 million range, they really have to think about if it's worth matching that with maybe upwards of the full max. With Duren, I think you're probably starting at, once you get into like 41, 42, 43, they really start sweating that and wondering if it's worth it. Camlo Travels, thank you for the super chat. Is Luka limited? Thought of package trading Luka. I'm not quite sure what you mean by the first question here. Are you saying like physically limited right now, as in like injured? He is not injured to my knowledge. Just double checking. All right, no updates here. No, I do not think the Lakers are like, if you're trading Luka, Well, one, you have to get more than Dallas got back for him, and I think they would because it's yeah. Sorry, Mavericks fans, but I mean you're resetting. Like, I mean, the Austin re-sign doesn't make sense at that point because Austin's on a different timeline than what you're trying to do. And I mean, if you're selling off on Luka, then you're hitting the reset button. You don't even have all your picks to rebuild anyway, but the Lakers don't operate this way. They're not a franchise. Like, I think that would be a mistake, and that's just pulling the plug on the situation far too early. Like, let's see what they're able to do this summer. Let's see what they're able to do next season, and then see where the franchise is at. And if they're even in a position to build a contender, like, who knows? But I think that would be getting off of that asset and the Luka era, like, far too early. I don't think that, I mean, would you be trading him at the peak of his powers or the peak of his value? Like, maybe. I still think, especially if they make a conference finals, win a championship, like, obviously his value's even higher at that point, although you wouldn't want to trade him coming off a championship. So, or maybe off the finals if you're Dallas, but I don't know. No, I'm trying to think through it, but I mean, the answer is they're not trading him, and they're trying to build around him. L824, thank you for the super chat. Silly idea to keep LeBron in LA. Let him play NFL as a red zone specialist, then join the Lakers midseason. Keeps elite NBA value / game while unlocking huge crossover, doc, and endorsement upside. Hashtag MJ baseball. I think the downside here would be the odds of him getting injured in the NFL are far higher than the odds of MJ getting injured playing baseball. So the fear would be something happened to him. I know you're saying red zone specialist, but even in the red zone, you could get injured. So it would be a huge crossover, an awesome doc, and the endorsement upside would be great. But I don't foresee that happening. Cambodian, thank you for the super chat. Vando, DA, Jake, and a first for sign and trade Duren. I mean, I would do that in a second. But the issue here is I have gotten more clarity, and I think it was someone named Jake, if I'm not mistaken, and shout out to them. I've now officially, like, the cap rules are so complicated that the sign and trade, I mean, it depends if you're above the cap or under the cap. So if Lakers are under the cap, straightforward, and they can just take in Duren. If you are above the cap, then it has to be outgoing salary within, I believe, $7.5 million. So it would just depend what other like, are the Lakers staying under the cap and doing this trade, or are they maybe going over the cap to retain some guys, fit Duren into an above the cap mold, but then you would be having to send out $7.5 million less than whatever his contract is, which I would assume would start at somewhere in the 40 range. So Jake, DA, and Vando would not, that would be about $26 or so million. So that's not within that 7.5 range above the cap. It just depends if they go above or under, but I think they would likely just go under, and you could take them on there. If you're Detroit, though, I would not, I would be like, we'll take the first and we'll take Dalton, or we'll take Adu. We're not taking on, I mean, maybe you need DA as a placeholder, but I would be like, I'm not taking on Jake and I'm not taking on Vando. Like, you're not sending me Vando in a sign and trade. So that would be, I think, a limitation there where Detroit would just be like, they'd honestly probably rather just lose Duren for nothing than take on Vando in a sign and trade. Replace Smart with Melton and Ellis. I like where your head's at. Thank you for super chat, the custodian. I mentioned Melton on my free agent bargains video as someone who could approximate Smart. I don't think he's quite as good defensively as Smart, and I don't think he's the on-court communicator and leader or like locker room guy that Smart is, but he's better offensively. Now he's coming off a really rough shooting season, but if you look at the last few years, the bigger picture, he is a better shooter than Smart, and he's got, I think, better ball handling and passing chops compared to the current, maybe not passing. I would actually say Smart's a better passer, but better like shot creation for himself than the current version of Smart. But could like approximate what Smart did. Not as strong as Smart, so I feel more comfortable with him exclusively guarding backcourt guys rather than guarding up. Maybe can guard some threes, but that might be stretching him a little bit. Ellis, I like, depending on the price. So it really depends on the price for both these guys. If these guys are minimums, yes. If these guys are a little bit above the minimum, depends. Like if you could split the room exception between both those guys, cool. So you're paying each of them a little bit above the minimum. You can do it that way. That's honestly like one of the best alternatives I've seen. I think there is this like intangible quality to Smart with just the taking charges, the energy that he provides. It's just, you can't really quantify it, but if we're just talking strictly basketball fit, I think that would be a step in the right direction. You are getting younger and a little bit more dynamism offensively. And I think assuming Melton bounces back, you are getting better shooters. So that's not a bad alternative and potentially same price as Marcus is going to be making. Braids, thank you for the super chat. I don't think Eddie Ref would want Luka/Draymond. That's true. And you could throw JJ in there as well. JJ is it's a little better this past season, but I think one of the more fiery head coaches with refs. XX Taz, did you see Duren has video call with Lakers tomorrow? I did. I talked about that. So I appreciate you sending that in. Connor Phillips, thank you for the super chat. I wish I had the unearned job security Rob has. Well, yeah. I'll leave that one there, but I hear you. Reed, thank you for the super chat. 3 for 130 for Walker Kessler, and see if New Orleans takes 2 firsts from Murph. I like that. I like where your head's at. I think I do have, for those who follow Crangus on X, he's been tweeting out some of the stuff with Murphy's defense and how bad it is, and how he is also similar to Luka, similar to LeBron, similar to Rui. He's best in a helper role and not an actual he's not a wing stopper. And I think people project with the height, with the wingspan, with the athleticism, with just the way he plays, that people like project this defensive stopper role onto Trey Murphy when that's just not who he is. So I think I would have like you'd really have to nail. Obviously, Kessler is a big step in that direction, but I think the other guy would have to be a certain caliber of defender, in my opinion, to make the puzzle piece work together. Offensively, be a great fit. Obviously, Murphy, one of the best high volume shooters in the league, become one of the best scorers in the league, and then you factor in Kessler and the screen and roll game. Love that fit. I just think rebounding outside, like Murphy's also not a great rebounder or even necessarily a good, borderline good rebounder. Maybe that's a little generous. I think he's more like an average-ish rebounder. Then Austin's a good rebounder for a guard, but not like next level. Luka's an elite rebounder for a guard/wing, and then Kessler's an elite rebounder. But I still think you want like one more good rebounder in there. So this could be a fit for John Collins, maybe, where you go Kessler, Collins, Murphy, Austin, Luka. I think at that point you don't have the wing defense though, or the point of attack defense. So I'm talking myself like I don't want to overthink it. If you could get Kessler and Murphy, you get Kessler and Murphy. But I think you would really need to find a specific skill set, because Collins, I don't think is the wing defender that you want or the point of attack guy that you want. So you're a little light there, but I don't want to overthink it. Yeah, you do that. I don't think New Orleans does it for 2 firsts, but we'll see. Next one from T-Toss. Thank you for the super chat. Getting Duren or Kessler, but losing Braun, Rui, Smart makes it difficult to make a roster that is as good or better than last season. It's a step back. That's kind of where I've been at in terms of the roster, where I think the Lakers are getting, and even if you get Duren or Kessler, you could definitely make this case in the form of Kessler, but I would also make this case in the form of Duren based on what we saw in the playoffs. Like LeBron is just a better player than Jalen, Duren, or Walker Kessler. So you are getting a worse player. Now, they are both better than DeAndre Ayton, and they both fit long-term, and they both upgrade arguably the most important position on a Luka team. So this is more of a fit thing than anything, but like you are swapping in a worse player in place of a better player, albeit different positions, different contexts, et cetera. It's just like from a pure talent perspective, it's different when we're talking about LeBron as the potential number 3 versus a Duren or a Kessler, in my opinion, like when you're looking at the hierarchies of all the trios. So that's part of it. But that's before we even mention Rui and Smart. And like, all right, maybe if you get Kelly Oubre or Quentin Grimes or something, you're at like a similar talent level, or maybe even a little bit more talented or whatever. But in Rui's case, Rui's one of the best shooters in the league. And do you wish he did more things than just shoot, or did more things than just shoot outside of just the playoffs? Like, yes, like he's a playoff riser, but to rise, you also have to be, unless you are like a young player ascending, which Rui no longer is, you have to be at a lower level to ascend. And he's at a lower level in the regular season, and that's part of his limitation. And so you'd like more from him, but he's still an elite shooter. Marcus Smart is an elite defender. So some of these other guys like an Oubre or Quentin Grimes, they have maybe like more well-rounded games, but you're still kind of looking for that like one elite skill that I think it's important to be like well-rounded with the elite skill, but the Lakers might not have that luxury. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a realistic chance in which like on paper, they got the guy, they got better from that perspective, but the actual roster isn't as deep, or you don't like the starting group as much. And that would be concerning. EKS27. Thank you for super chat. I like this one because it gives me a little cover in terms of how I can answer the question. So I appreciate the creativity here. But he asks, before you made this a profession, what type of fan were you? Were you more optimistic, or would you be in the chat calling for RP's job? I'd probably be the latter. I'd probably be crashing out right now if I was a Laker fan with some of the developments that have happened and just the perceived lack of activity from the Lakers, at least the public lack of activity from the Lakers. So I'd probably be in the latter camp here among these two. I was a fan though so to give you, I've talked about this a couple times before, so apologies to anyone who's like heard this before, but a few summers ago, I was going through my childhood room because I'm fortunate enough where parents still live in the same house. So still got my childhood room and all my childhood stuff. And I was cleaning it out and throwing stuff out. And I found these old folders, and I had kind of forgotten about this, but like this was when I was like 8, 9 years old. I had like all these notebooks where I was doing mock rotations, and all the time I would go in my backyard and I would play like full 48-minute games, and I would play. It sounds crazy, but I would play for both teams. So I would, I'd be the Lakers versus the Sixers or whatever. And it's like, all right, like I'm on offense on both teams, but it's like the Lakers have the ball. All right, I'm running the offense, and then I'm kind of like trying to make it realistic of they dumped the ball to Shaq and whatever. And then I would like have these notebooks where I would be keeping track of the stats, and I would have the full rotation breakdown. So this was kind of inherent in my fandom, where even when I was 8 years old, I was thinking about how would I run the rotation. And then on 2K and live, like my favorite modes when they were invented were like the GM modes and running the team and making trades and signings and improving things. So I've always had this knack for thinking about the rotation, the cap sheet, those things. Like that's just been part of my fandom since I was a kid. So I would say I'd probably be doing what I'm doing now, but just doing it from a fan perspective instead of more from an analyst, journalist perspective. And I probably would be crashing out because I'd be looking at the declining options and being like, all right, they might get the guy, but are they going to build the team? Like it goes beyond the guy. You win the press conference with the guy, you win the championship with the team. And I think that's what the Lakers got to figure out here. Ryan Lucas, thank you for the super chat. I think JK on the way with the closed mouth emoji. Cheers, bro. Appreciate it, Ryan. And I know you've been on the JK stuff. So that's Jonathan Kuminga, who was team option was declined by Atlanta today. So he's someone that, depending on the direction the Lakers go with LeBron or or Rui, I think would make sense. My things with JK are twofold. So I wonder what the number would be. And I think his team option was about 24, 23 point something. So I would assume it would be under that. Then I also wonder like where he fits in the overall offensive hierarchy. Cause I still think even if they got him, I would want the Watson, Eason, Herb Jones, that type of guy where I don't think he's quite good enough to be the stopper in the lineup. So the optimal build to me would be like the elite defensive center of, more, in this case, a more offensive minded four, and then another stopper if you're going that route. But really curious to know what his market ends up being. I think Rob's going to be interested, and the Lakers were, to my understanding, previously interested around the trade deadline. So would not be surprised by that. But I think if they bring him in, I would want it structured where it's him and Luka and Austin as more so, I guess, like the offensive guys, though it depends on what happens with Watson. If it's Watson, obviously I think that changes the hierarchy. But I think you need two better defenders in there. I don't think he could be a top two defender in your lineup as of right now. And I think he's more of a 4 than a 3. So that's the distinction there. 45th say, excuse me. I think of a super chat, K-Ware, Miles Turner, both can run, block, shoot, K-Ware cheap. Yeah, I mean, you're preaching to the choir here on Khalil Ware. He was my third target on my list originally, behind Kessler and Duren before he got traded. So I think at this point, the price is probably higher than the Lakers would want to pay. Turner, I've talked about it ad nauseum, so I don't really want to circle back on him too much, but I just don't think he's a lob threat or rebounder at the level that the Lakers need. Now, if you can get Turner and get Watson, or like if saving money at the center position in relation to Kessler or Duren allows you to go get Watson too, and you tell me, hey, can you get Turner and Watson and make the math work? All right, I'm more open to that build. If it's just like Turner as the big addition, and then you get Oubre or Grimes or one of those lower tier guys, in my opinion, that's where I'm a little more out on it. So if he's like, for Turner, I would want an asset back, and I would also want the saved money to go toward a better player. So I'd want him to be the second best player they're adding and also getting an asset back. And I think that Venn diagram is pretty unlikely. And so for that, I'm lower on Turner, but I know plenty of people I respect are high on him. Final two here before I wrap, because I will be back in an hour. I need to take a quick break, and then I'll be back at 7 p.m. to talk through the wings. Yup, she's right. Thank you for the super chat. We can now put to rest the idea that the Lakers take care of their legends. They mistreated Magic in the front office, and now have mistreated Braun and AD. So I said this earlier when talking through LeBron, and there's a question about him sabotaging things. Like the writing's not on the wall yet officially. So I want to leave some room here for things to play out, and maybe LeBron is back and we're having a different conversation. But certainly, I mean, the Magic thing is its own podcast, and I don't want to get too much into that, but undeniably, like the AD situation, at least from what I know, at least what's been publicly out there, like I would not say they handled it the best in terms of factoring in AD's, and I get the secrecy with the whole trade, but I think they could have handled the AD situation a little bit better. And then depending on how this Braun situation goes. Now, with some of the stuff that's been out there, but the report that he's the one leaving the Lakers out to dry, like, I don't know what my perspective on it. I've heard different things, but I don't know. Well, so I want to reserve judgment until the situation's resolved. Until the situation is resolved, I understand why you feel that way, and I think you can make that argument. I'm not denying that, but yeah, I mean, I will say in general, like the Lakers do pride themselves on being the franchise that takes care of stars the most, and depending on how the situation ends, like that. Now it's I don't know. It's a complex situation, but we will cover it and continue to talk about it. She 2669. Thank you for the super chat. How do we feel about Kuminga? So I just touched on him a little bit. What I would say in terms of looking into his game a little bit more these last couple hours, like that's what I was doing before I came on here and before the Duren stuff broke. So he's been a below average 3-point shooter in 4 of his 5 seasons. The 1 year he shot above average was his second season. So it's been 3 straight years at 32%, 31, and 33 this past season. So from that perspective, I guess Kuminga is interesting to me because you could look at Kuminga as like, I think there's a natural PJ Washington comp here where PJ Washington was an interesting player, but not quite the most like efficient, optimal role player in Charlotte. And, I think there was questions about he's kind of a tweener and he's not a great shooter and he has like defensive potential, but he's not necessarily like a lockdown defender. And he went to Dallas, and playing next to Luka and playing in that system and playing with that team was a huge part in them making the finals, and hit big shots and played great defense and was a big part of that identity with their size and their rebounding and the switchability. And so I think there is something there with, I could see something like that with Kuminga. Now, my fears are multifold here, where last 2 years has played a combined 83 games. So that's concerning. Prior to that had been 70 games, 67, 74. So cleaner health track record to start his career. Last couple of years, little below that. Number two, the key thing on a Luka and Austin team for the non-Luka and Austin guys is going to be shooting. I think you need to shoot at a certain level. And again, he's been a below average 3-point shooter 4 of his 5 seasons, including 3 straight seasons. So like there's some question marks about, can he space the floor? Can he be that off-ball threat? And then I think in general, based on the Golden State situation and kind of coming out of that and then going to Atlanta, and I think all things considered, playing like solid there. I think it was a bit disappointing in the playoffs. Shot 21%, averaged 3 rebounds a game. I just wonder if he's willing to view himself as a role player and buy into that. I think it can work. If he still views himself as a star on the rise and wants a certain offensive role and isn't willing to take a step back offensively to do those things, that's where my tension would come in. So I also, again, would not acquire him as the wing stopper. If it's, instead of Peyton Watson, we got Jonathan Kuminga, or instead of Tari Eason, we got Jonathan, or instead of Herb Jones, like, I just don't think he's in the same class as those guys defensively, and is more of a 4 positionally, where I think Watson and Eason could play either forward spot. Herb could play the 2 or the 3. He, to me, is primarily a 4 who can maybe scale down to play the 3, but just isn't like a lockdown guy. So I guess I would say I'm probably lower on Kuminga than most. I think he's one of those guys that like people fall in love with because you see the offensive, he's got the bag, he's got the athleticism, he's got the physical tools, and he had the hype coming in with being a lottery pick. But in terms of, I don't think he's the defender, the rebounder, or the shooter that you want from that position. So that's where I'm a little bit lower. And it's like, all right, what's the vision here? What's the sell? Well, it's the athleticism and the offense, but I think there's a cap to that on a Luka team. Like if he's willing to spot up, cut, be a pick and roll guy as a screener and roller, and really buy into that PJ Washington role, I'm more open to it. But I'm probably lower on him than consensus. We'll get more into it in the Wings Q&A coming up in an hour. But with all that said, I appreciate you guys for rocking with me. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5. Or please be sure to hit that subscribe button, like and comment, and turn on channel notifications. And for those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back in roughly 1 hour, going live with JSM to break down the wing market, look at my tiers of wings, looking at 10 guys, 4 tiers, and talking through their game and their fit in LA, how much we'd pay them, how much we'd trade for them. Then we'll get into the Q&A. So be back in an hour. And all right, we got some breaking news with the Nick Smith Jr. situation here. So Nick Smith Jr. the Lakers did decline his team option, which, yes. Okay. So that's, all right, let me check my phone. All right. Yeah. So they declined the Nick Smith Jr. option. So that we're looking at 48 to 52 officially in cap space, depending on what they do with Jackson. But I'll be back in an hour. I will talk to you all then.